Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Meet the Artists. I'm Richard Russell, Executive Director of Sarasota Opera, and we are grateful to have you here. We hope you will enjoy tonight's program. Um, we will begin in just a moment, but I just want to tell you a little bit, since this is a semi-new format for us, of somewhat of the ground rules and what we'll be doing. I will introduce Maestro DeRenzi, who will be moderating tonight's program. And then after he will introduce all of our panelists, they will have a discussion for a while. And then at the end of that time, Maestro will entertain questions. And you can participate with a question in either of two ways. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a box that says Q&A. You are welcome to type in a question in that Q&A box. Or if you raise your hand, we can unmute you and you can ask your question verbally. We're not able to see you. You are hopefully will be able to see us once we start the program. And you're not able to speak to each other or to us, but we can unmute you to be able to ask your question. So you just hold your questions to the ear. You can enter your questions during the program, but we won't get to them to the end. So we're glad you're here, and without further ado, I would like to introduce Maestro Victor DeRenzi, who will be your moderator for today. And Maestro, you need to unmute yourself.
Welcome, everyone. My job is to try to unmute myself when I need to be unmuted and to stay in the center of the camera, both of which so far I'm successful at. I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. I will introduce them as they show up on my screen. First, our stage director for this production, Mark Freiman. Mark. There you go. Our baritone, Stefano DePeppo, bass baritone. Our soprano, Anna Mandina. One more.
Hello.
And our conductor, Maestro Marcello Cormio. There we are. We're all here. Welcome, everyone. So why don't we just start with, maybe you could each tell us a little about yourself, your history in your life, but your history in Sarasota Opera. And also, I'd love to know what you've all been doing in the last 11 months. Because as you all know, it is 11 months since we stopped our season on March 13th, and I know you've all been busy with various things. So Mark, let me go to you first.
My life story, I'm not sure.
A little bit. You were a singer, right? You started life as a singer, so let's go from there.
I started in opera when I was 8 years old with a tiny little company in New York called the Amato Opera that performed every weekend in the regular season, every month a different opera. And I just really loved it. And a few years later, totally unrelated, but I got into the Metropolitan Opera and I sang there for 3 years, got to sing some solos and radio broadcasts, the first telecasts. But I had no intention of being a singer. I studied art in college, but when I got home back into New York, I was singing at the Amato Opera on weekends in the chorus and was cast in some small roles, and I turned them down because I didn't want to embarrass myself. And Tony Amato of the Amato Opera said, "I really want you to do them." So I took voice lessons just so that I wouldn't embarrass myself in small parts. And I just realized I had a much louder voice than I expected. So I kind of made a transition. I've worked as a graphic designer, and that's always supported my singing. Everybody that is a performer has to have something else going on in between. But I was able to have a career as a regional singer. And I came to Sarasota in actually 15 years ago as a singer. Came back 4 years ago as a director, and it's been great fun to be back here and be a part of this. And I think all of us, especially in this strange season, we just feel tremendous gratitude to you, Maestro, and to Richard Russell for having the creativity and vision to make this happen, because I think all of us were just not expecting to be doing anything for many more months.
Well, while you were singing at the Metropolitan Opera in the children's chorus, across the ocean singing at the La Scala Children's Chorus, this is something quite that you have in common, that you both started in the children's chorus with Stefano DePeppo. Stefano.
Oh, Mark, I actually didn't know.
I didn't know.
This common story that we have. Anyway, I'm Stefano DePeppo. Even if my accent sounds from Boston, I'm actually, I was born and raised in Italy. And as Maestro said, when I was living in Milan, I was quite young. I was 8, and I always liked singing. And I was just by accident chosen to be part of the children chorus at La Scala. And I was there for a few years, and until nature made it impossible to be there. I was around 14, 15 years old. But that experience really made me decide, I think, I won't become one of those singers that I would sort of share the stage with. And at the time in the 70s, there were big names still. So eventually to support myself, I worked in a bank, and I studied music and singing, and slowly I started my career. I actually moved first to London for 3 years, and then eventually I moved to Mexico City for 10 years. I lived there, and I sang at the opera house in Mexico City and in other opera houses around the country, until I started to sing outside Mexico. And about 21 years ago, I decided to move to New York City. We try our destiny, how it goes, and I think it was a good decision. And I was lucky enough to continue to develop my career. And my experience here at Sarasota started slightly before the experience at Sarasota Opera, because I actually made my debut in Sarasota, the city. I think it was in 2006 or 7 that I sang Don Giovanni with a touring company. But then eventually the big debut in Sarasota was in 2008 when I sang in Barbaro Seville. And it was the first of many beautiful experiences here from 2008 until actually last year. In March, I was here when things happened. We all know what, and eventually the performances had to be cut short, and we left, and our lives took different directions, because we were absolutely, it was impossible to perform. So once again, I have to say that I'm really grateful to Sarasota Opera, to Maestro DeRenzi, Richard Russell, because it's something that me myself, and I'm sure that everybody else wasn't expecting to be here again, to really be on stage live and look outside and see the theater.
We're happy to have you back with us. Mandina.
Yes, hello. Okay, so should I really start back and
Say whatever you'd like to say. A lot of people know you here. We've seen you perform many times.
Yes.
And
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. So I, I'm getting started with my career, and I'm lucky enough to have started at Sarasota Opera as an apprentice artist in 2017. I had just graduated from my master's degree program in Boston in 2016 and auditioned for Sarasota that fall. And I was lucky enough to be chosen as an apprentice. So that was my first time here in Sarasota. And I actually have been lucky enough to work here since then. I have sung Annina in La Traviata here, and then covering Micaela in Carmen as a studio artist. And then in 2019, I was Liu in Turandot. And just this last season, I did sing Mimi in our performances of La Boheme until they had to end. But we were able to perform 10 times, and that was lovely and just a wonderful experience.
You owe Sarasota 3 more performances of Mimi.
I do. I have 3 more Mimis to perform for you all. So hopefully that could happen. But to echo Stefano and Mark's sentiments, it's just a dream come true to be back here performing live after this incredibly difficult year for the performing arts. So thank you, Maestro, and I'm so excited for you all to see this opera. It's so good. It's so fun.
Maestro Marcello Cormio.
Thank you, Maestro DeRenzi. Good evening, everyone. I'm the conductor of this production, and I'm like Stefano, originally from Italy. I hail from South Italy, but I've lived in the US for 16 years now. And I've been lucky to have developed a career in this country, both in the symphonic field and the operatic field. I've been to Sarasota Opera many times as well. The first experience in Sarasota was as assistant to Maestro DeRenzi in 2010, so 11 years ago. And since then, I've been back several times. I've conducted Barbara Seville and Marriage of Figaro and Così fan tutte. And I was here 2 years ago for my last production. And I'm really glad to be back. All of my colleagues have already said that, but I want to emphasize how it takes courage and creativity at the same time to envision something this is possible under these very difficult circumstances and safe, and at the same time try to keep with the artistic standard of excellence and accomplish the artistic mission of a company. And so once again, I want to praise Maestro and Richard and the Sarasota Opera for not giving in and continuing to pursue their mission in the arts.
Yes, and we don't want to give in, but we also, as you all know, want to keep you all safe and keep our audience safe. And
That's
so
true.
far, we've all been successful at that. And it's certainly, that is a group effort that we keep each other safe. So I was thinking, as I was going through the repertoire of Sarasota Opera, by doing Serva Padrona, we've actually expanded our repertoire by 50 years. Until this Friday, the earliest opera we've performed was The Abduction from the Seraglio by Mozart, which is from the 1780s. And the most recent opera was 2017 when our youth opera did a world premiere. So all of you, I think like me, we're pretty much embedded in the romantic repertoire. What is it like doing a piece that comes to us so early in music history, before Mozart? Before Mozart's first big successful opera was Pergolesi. Stefano, why don't I start with you? Because you've done a lot of Rossini, you've done a lot of various repertoire, and here you are, stuck in the 1730s.
Well, I think it's a beautiful way to be stuck. Also because I do not have a lot of experience with this so early repertoire. As you know, I move more frequently throughout Mozart and Rossini, so going towards 19th century. But I'm not a totally stranger to this repertoire, because I sang in Paisiello's Barbiere di Siviglia, and I actually already sang many years ago in La Serva Padrona. So it's I think it's very interesting how this repertoire is somehow the origin of whatever comes later. I was actually talking to Marcello about the music that somehow reminds, or better said, Mozart has definitely had influences from this repertoire, from Pergolesi and his contemporary musicians. So being swimming in, as I said before, more in closer to bel canto, Rossini and previous Mozart, you see really that what we usually sing is, it comes from a previous history, which is what we are doing now. It sounds, perhaps music sounds more simple, a little bit more naive in a way, but it's very interesting to be able to perform this opera, because also they're not very often performed at all.
What about you, Mandina?
So yes, my experience with this, these intermezzi, I learned about them in music history. I had never heard them until music history, and then, you know, here we are performing it, and it's just such a delightful short piece of work. I don't often get to perform comedies. I lean more toward the dramatic, tragic operas where I die at the end. But this has been such a fun experience for me to, you know, number one, work with Stefano again. He's hilarious. And also to explore a character that she's, you know, she's a spitfire. She's hilarious. And it's been so much fun for me to kind of explore the character and find certain things that I may not have gotten to explore in other operas.
Maestro Cormio, like many musicians, you are a big lover of Bach. And of course, this is written around the time of Bach. Yes, certainly Bach was alive and writing. And is this very different than that, what you're, you know, the kind of music we're all raised on, because musicians study Bach a great deal. So where do you put this in terms of that? How do you use your Bach knowledge and your Italian persona in a work like this?
Well, as Stefano and in passing Anna mentioned, this piece has both an importance in history as the forerunner of the entire, basically, development of the opera buffa in the 18 and early 1900s. And it is that in history books because it is really considered a milestone in that kind of development. There's something that happened actually in Paris about 20 years after the piece was written, when, and this is what is studied in books, it caused a big rage, and all of the French philosophers and musicologists and artists started a fight around this piece that was all about keeping in line with this more lyrical serious opera with these high subjects, or giving in to the Italian buffoons, so to speak. They call it querelle des bouffons. And so it has this great importance. But to come back to your question, by 1732, Bach was probably the only person on earth who was still writing in the style that he kept writing in. Meaning that, as we know, he was considered towards the end of his career to just look back at the past, because he continued to write in this highly conceptual contrapuntal style. But especially down here in Italy, especially in Naples, where opera was flourishing so much, music was taking a different direction. So I guess to answer your question briefly, our job as conductors and as artists is to be capable of seeing all these different influences, understand the style of a piece, but not necessarily, be so univocal, like just approach something in one way. The pieces before the 1750 and before Mozart are nowadays considered as the realm of specialists, the early music specialists. And that is why a company like Sarasota Opera has expanded by 50 years the repertoire, because opera companies that deal with the main repertoire would normally start at Mozart and continue with the repertoire that is closer to us. This music seems to belong to a completely different past. And so what I'm saying is that it's partly our job as artists to kind of bridge that gap and show people that, yes, the style is different, the orchestral writing is simpler, the orchestra is just comprised of strings. But this opera is great because arguably for the first time, everyday life, comedy, but also dealing with human nature and with social classes gets to the stage. And when you have, after 50 years a genius like Mozart and Beaumarchais and Mozart coming along, then the world can enjoy the Marriage of Figaro, which is the high point of all of this development. So I think I can, really safely set aside my Bach when I'm dealing with this and just think of all of the beautiful Italian operatic things that this opera is already kind of forecasting and foreshadowing.
It's interesting to me, if I could jump in before I talk to you, Mark, a lot of these works, as you all said, they're things we know about, we've studied in school, and whatever they may be, once we do them on stage, they take a completely different life. There are no, when people sometimes say opera houses or museums, which I'm not really even sure what that means, but the fact that we perform something means we're not a museum. It's not, the Mona Lisa is always the Mona Lisa, but an opera in the hands of a performer is very different. It's, the performance that you are all doing, which I'm really enjoying. I've seen it 4 times, I guess, already in rehearsals straight through. It suddenly is a very different piece than that one that we read about, that we heard about in school, or maybe even heard on recordings, because there are quite a few recordings of this, but there's no place like theater, I'll tell you. Mark, when you left us, actually you left us and your production left us, you directed what I consider to be the most complicated scene in opera, which was Act 2 of La Boheme. Act 2 of La Boheme, unless you've seen one has looked at a score of La Boheme, it's hard to imagine how complicated and how the characters work with each other, the chorus, everybody saying something, doing something different, focusing the attention someplace else. And now here you are from maybe the biggest act in opera to an opera with 3 characters. What is that like?
It's very different. I think in La Boheme, I counted, we had at the end of Act 2, by the time we had our marching band come on, we had 73 people on stage last year, 73 people. We had an expanded chorus. We had a lot of lead roles, smaller roles. Everybody's in Act 2. We had supers, extras on stage. We had a big children's chorus. So yeah, it was a lot of people.
And if I may interrupt you, you had 73 people that all had different characters. So it's not as if you had a chorus of priests and a chorus of nuns and whatever. Everyone in Boheme is a different person. There is no 2 people. You can't say, watch your colleague to your left and do what he does. It just doesn't happen. So it's.
Yeah, a lot of that is relying on the artistry of our artists. I was encouraging the young artists that were making up the chorus and the kids to come up with characters as townspeople, because certainly I can't direct everybody, every little movement and every bit of their character. This is certainly very different because we're really focused on Anna and Stefano, and we also have a mute character in this opera, their servant Vespone, played by another one of our young artists, James Eder. And I think it is kind of a breath of fresh air from what we've done before, just this season overall. The mood at the Opera House, at the complex where we're rehearsing, is very different than what we're used to. We're used to lots of people running around rehearsals for 4 different operas all going on at the same time. We're used to coachings and scene programs being staged. This is very different just to have right now just the first 2 operas in the season. But it is also nice in that we can be more focused on each other and what we're doing. And it does make it a little more difficult. You know, Stefano and Anna really have to carry the show, and they really are, they're on all the time. And it's funny when we were looking at rehearsal schedule and trying to figure out who was going to rehearse when, and well, they're called all the time to rehearsal. It's not like, well, we're doing act 2, so so-and-so is not going to be called for rehearsal that day. It's very different.
Is it more in their hands as singers than it may be in La Boheme, for instance? How it molded together? I know you were a very organized director, and before you came, you had a lot of ideas and a lot of the stage action down and the movement, the blocking, which is the choreography. But how much, I would think it could be a little different in this than maybe Triumphal Scene from Aida.
Yeah. Yes. Well, no elephants, first of all, so that's different. I do like to plan everything out early. I do like to have everything on paper, but once it gets up on its feet, no matter what the piece, I always want to see what the artists have to offer. And I always change things. Maestro Cormio was very helpful to me also in this respect, because he has a really great dramatic eye and was helping me also with some of the Italian that I didn't quite translate correctly, and some of the idioms and meanings. I knew that Stefano had done this before, so that was helpful too. He had some ideas about the character. Anna just has, there are some things that you can't teach as a director necessarily. I think the biggest challenge for me in this piece is that you have the master and the maid, and they are constantly bickering, right? They're scolding each other, yelling at each other. And then all of a sudden at the end, they're in love and they're married. And it seems to turn on a dime. So when I first was studying this, because I was not familiar with the show, I was trying to figure out how can that work? And I watched a couple of videos on YouTube, and I was thinking, this isn't really a very good piece. But once I started studying the libretto, I realized that there are places, and so we talked about this in rehearsal, what are the places where we can see that the master really does care for his servant, and that the servant really does care for the master, and how can we bring out those moments? So we discussed that. And I had some ideas of where that might happen, but so did Stefano and Anna. And I think that both of them just have a great natural charm. This is sort of what I want to get back to. They have very winning personalities, and that really comes through. And I think that's a real secret. And I don't know that I could necessarily bring that out with someone that just doesn't bring that talent to the stage.
So when we were talking about what operas to do, I looked at my bookshelf, which you could all see over there, and I saw Serva Padrona, which is talked about a lot. And the one thing, it was a very thin book on my shelf. And we decided we wanted to have a performance that was an evening, not too long, because we didn't want to have an intermission. So we looked for something, but also something not too short. So I looked at this thin little book, and then I started doing some timing for how long this thin little score takes to perform, and found that it's fairly short in time. It's about 40 minutes, maybe even less than that. What do we do? Maestro, Mark, we have a short opera. What are we doing to make it not a 40-minute evening? You want to talk a little about what we're doing, both of you?
Right, for that, Maestro.
Hmm?
Okay. Yes, I want to tell our audience that you're going to see a completely unique production of Serva Padrona. It's going to be the first of its kind and maybe replicated somehow. But as Maestro DeRenzi was saying, we have found a way to make the show and the evening a little longer. And just to give you a little bit of context, the reason for this opera to be so short is that is technically not an opera, but is two intermezzi. So this is the music that was performed in the intermission of an opera. Think how much people loved opera back then. You know, in the two intermissions of an opera seria, they wanted to get more opera. And so these two comical intermezzi were performed in the first and second intermission of a 3-act opera seria, serious opera. And that is why it's as short as Maestro was saying. So we came up, our three crazy minds, Maestro DeRenzi, Mark, and I came up with a prologue, with a whole beginning to this day that happens in the house of Uberto, where the story is that the servants in the house know that the master is out in the evening before. They decide to have some fun together, and they sing some songs and they dance and they have fun with each other. And so this is the dramatical pretext or excuse to offer our audience more beautiful music that was chosen from some wonderful arie antiche Italian songs from a previous period of time. We can imagine that maybe the three servants knew these songs that were popular at that time, and that would be accurate because all the songs we chose for this prologue are from the 1600s by composers like Scarlatti and Rontani and Fasolo. And they form a beautiful introduction to the opera. And then we also decided to offer some overture music, as of course this intermezzi didn't have their proper overture. And if Maestro wants, I can talk a little bit about that as well, but maybe Mark, you want to mention something about our concept for the beginning and how that was developed, and you coming up with a text for recitative that I had to put to music?
Well, what I liked was, opera is always a collaboration, right? There are always so many people that need to work together. But I really loved that you and Maestro DeRenzi and I really collaborated and really built on ideas. I think Maestro DeRenzi, you first said you wanted a prologue, and Maestro Cormio, you were coming up with the songs. I think I don't remember how we came up with the idea of servants in the house. I think maybe Maestro DeRenzi, that was your idea. When I was looking at the songs, it seemed that they were all love songs, but one of them, the singer is very despondent. So kind of came up with a little storyline that perhaps the two men are wooing Serpina, Anna, and then Maestro Cormio, you said, it would be better if maybe it's that they're kind of playing around, that it's not very serious. And so I love that we did all this back and forth. And Maestro DeRenzi had said Serpina should come out and speak a line to the audience in English and just explain what's going on. And then I think Maestro Cormio, you suggested that we that you could compose a recitative. So I wrote some rhyming verse that could be set to music in English. And so a true collaboration that all of us were building on each other's ideas. And the funny thing was that last week when we really put it up on stage for the first time, afterwards, we were all going to each other and saying, wow, that really worked. This is really charming. We were kind of pleasantly surprised. We thought it would be okay, but I mean, we really are happy with it.
Yes, and I was just thinking, Maestro, as Mark was mentioning that little bit of recitative at the beginning, that we actually expanded the repertoire 50 years back and more than 2017, because because that recitative is copyright 2021. I'm just teasing. It's just a tiny little bit of music that we had fun composing, but the whole project was really fun. And going back, after all these months of forced inactivity and the arts kind of being suspended, it was beautiful to come back to it with also a very creative component.
A lot of this opera, Stefano and Mandina, you'll have to excuse me because I call her Mandina, and it's not disrespectful. It's just who she is to me. Anna, you feel bad if I call you Anna, don't you? No. A lot of this opera is recitativo. Now, recitativo in opera is a part where it's not really an aria, but people talk a lot and they talk in rhythm and they'll tell you the story, but they could go fast or go slow and make it work as ever they want. So you do a lot of this, the two of you together, and you're both really, really very good at it. You want to talk what that's like doing? Are you pretty set at in the way this is going to happen? How much leeway do you have? I've noticed that it seems to be, you seem to have decided a while ago what you're going to do, but how do you play with this? It's so spontaneous. It sounds so spontaneous, like you're making it up.
Should I start? Well, for myself, I definitely have a big advantage. Being Italian, of course, to me, it's quite natural to understand the fluidity of the words, of the phrases, of the interaction between the characters. So this doesn't mean that one doesn't have to, or myself, I don't have to really put myself into understanding how the dynamic of the words and with just a few notes here and there, the chords. And it's fantastic that it's actually, for this time, it's the first time that I sing in an opera with recitativo and cello. It's really very, very, very effective. But recitativi must be, because perhaps they are not the most interesting part of the opera. So if we are not trying to make them as real and spontaneous as possible, it becomes really a moment where the mood and the attention of the audience can be really low. So I think it's treating it as a play, basically, with notes and placement of our voices. Of course, it's the trick to make them interesting. And Anna, of course, she had to work harder because Italian is not her first language, but she did an amazing job. We worked with Marcello a lot to really create, first of all, the right mood of the word, just speaking them, and then eventually from speaking them to put them into the notes that the composer has written. And this is not an easy task to make them together. And because if I say che bella giornata oggi, what a beautiful day, but I have to say che bella giornata oggi, it becomes a little bit more complicated, especially when two people are talking, like but I think that at the end it's great, Maestro, that you're saying that it sounds like we have made it as spontaneous as possible, because this is actually the goal of this kind of part of the opera, the famous and famed and many singers are really afraid of recitativi because they don't know exactly how to, and they are hard, especially if you're not a native speaker. But Anna is fantastic. So please tell us.
Thank you all, first of all, because that is the best compliment I could ever receive. This, has been a challenge for me, definitely, but I am so incredibly lucky to be working with Stefano and Maestro Cormio, because, working with two native Italians on an Italian opera is only going to improve me as an artist and my language and my pronunciation, and so that it all seems spontaneous. That's the goal, and I'm so glad that it seems that way, because for me, I had to plan out everything I was going to do. But it's great that it doesn't seem that way. Our rehearsals have made it seem more organic the longer we go on together and work together. So I know for me personally, I really have enjoyed the process with Stefano, because throughout our rehearsals, you would be a little more spontaneous. And then that would make me think, oh, well, I guess I could free myself up a little bit on this line and maybe try something here. So this has been such a wonderful learning process for me, and working with you, Maestro Cormio, just because you've really helped me with certain pronunciation things that I was doing that just, a few tweaks would make me sound more authentic than what I was doing before. And, so anyway, this has been extremely challenging for me, but I am very proud of where we are now this week before opening, because it is so much fun. Now we've gotten to just the point of being able to have fun with each other.
Maestro, somebody, I think Stefano mentioned the harpsichord and the cello. If you could briefly tell us something about that, because we've never, with recitative at Sarasota Opera, we have never had a harpsichord. It really is not period. Once you get into Mozart, it's more of a forte piano, and then in Rossini, it's just a regular piano. Here we have the harpsichord, and if you want to talk about it a second.
Yes, so this part of the opera, the recitative that we have been talking about, recitativo comes from recite, so it's the part where really it's more similar to straight theater, I would say. They're called secchi, which means dry in Italian, which is the part where no orchestra is playing underneath the singers. So the traditional way to do it is to have a support instrument that would basically play chords, the harmony, to give the singer an oral orientation to their pitches. So it's a support instrument that can be treated, it's called technically continuo, because I don't want to get into the technicalities of what a continuo is, but that was the use of the time. And so as Maestro DeRenzi was saying, to perform recitativi secchi, dry recits, you need to have a keyboard instrument, or the tradition was to have a keyboard instrument. But that has never happened at Sarasota Opera because of the timeline of the repertoire. Maestro DeRenzi is very faithful to try to replicate the type of instruments that were used at a different time. It's interesting that if I'm not mistaken, right around this time, I want to say 1732. I stand corrected if I'm mistaken, but Bartolomeo Cristofori, an Italian man, was for the first time creating what we call the piano or the forte piano, an instrument with strings that were hit by little hammers as opposed to plucked. But the harpsichord was in use and kept being in use, throughout a good part of the 1700s. By the time of Mozart, it was definitely replaced by other keyboard instruments. So what you hear when you hear a harpsichord, you hear a keyboard instrument where the strings inside the instrument are plucked for each single string, there's a little hook that is put in action by the keys of the player. And the effect that we are going after in this production is to try to replicate that idea of continuo, which was a little group of players that would take that part of the music. And so we have this very nice addition of the cello together with the harpsichord to create this beautiful harmonic carpet for the dialogues and the recitatives of the singers.
I'm going to go to some questions. First of all, I want to thank all of you who write such nice comments and let you know we really appreciate them. One of my questions are any plans to stage Il Viaggio a Reims, which is a Rossini opera, which was recently rediscovered, and I say recently within the last 50 years. I think when I think of the Viaggio a Reims, I think of something Caruso once supposedly said, that Il Trovatore was an easy opera. All you need are the four greatest singers of all time. And Viaggio a Reims is a bit of the same thing, except you need 15 really great Rossini singers to do it. And when the piece was first discovered, it was performed at La Scala. Abbado recorded it with all of the most famous people, but it has not done that much because that has become a problem, finding that many Rossini singers and putting them in one place. This other question, I have another question, is this opera written in a certain dialect? No, it's just plain old Italian. And although Pergolesi did write an opera in Neapolitan, in the Neapolitan language, which I would love to do if I could ever find a cast of people who speak Neapolitan. Dialects are very difficult to do on stage. If you have any other questions, please send them in.
But Maestro, we are performing the overture to that opera.
Yes, tell the intermezzo, tell us about that, because we didn't talk about the two pieces, other pieces in this.
Yes, so just briefly, we also inserted instrumental pieces like overture-like pieces. And at the beginning of the first intermezzo, we'll have the overture to Piccini's opera La Buona Figliuola. And my choice there was basically motivated by the fact that that's the second big milestone in the history of opera buffa in the 1700s. So La Serva Padrona was considered the beginning, and when this other opera came a couple of decades later, again this discussion about opera buffa was revived, and La Buona Figliuola by Piccini actually was so famous that in Paris there were fashion styles made after the main character of the opera, which is called La Cecchina. And so it seemed only fit to decide to use this overture for the beginning. And between the two intermezzi, we're actually performing this overture to the opera in Neapolitan that Pergolesi wrote. Pergolesi was from the Marche region. His name actually was not Pergolesi. As they used to do, they would give nickname from the place of origin. His name was Giovan Battista Draghi, but his family was from the town of Pergole, and so Pergolesi, the people that come from Pergola or Pergole. But he lived and composed mainly for the theater in Napoli, in Naples. And so he was asked to write a piece in Neapolitan. It's called Lo Frate Innamorato. And the overture to this piece, you will be able to hear in between the two intermezzi as some very nice, expressive, beautiful music.
Yeah. I have a question about how many instruments are in the orchestra. You want to answer that, Marcello, since they're in front of you?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, this piece is written for an orchestra of string instruments only. And the string orchestra is normally divided into 5 sections: the first violin, the second violins, viola, cello, and bass. And this is normal in all of the operas that you've ever seen at Sarasota Opera. The string part of the orchestra is always composed by those sections. Now, the number of players for each section is something debatable. Actually, Maestro, you know, there's you can find papers that say that Handel had 50 double basses in his orchestra in London. It's hard to really understand what was the use, mainly because it was different in every single city and in every single court of Europe. In our present case, we have what we would call a chamber string orchestra. And so we have 6 violins in total, 3 first violins, 3 second violins, 2 violas, 3 cellos, and 2 basses, plus the harpsichord. And the goal when you have a chamber orchestra is to have a balance between the parts, as opposed to not necessarily having a big section of players. The sound carries very well in the theater. Of course, there were limitations as to how many players could be in the pit because they are safely distanced. But this is an ensemble that makes complete justice to the score.
Mark, I have a question maybe you can answer as well as Maestro. Will it be obvious to the audience when you move from section to section if you don't know the piece?
I'm not sure what you mean section to section.
Will they know when we go from recitativo to the aria part?
Oh, I see. Well, I think just the instrumentation, like Maestro Cormio was saying, that the recitative are sung with the harpsichord and the cello, and then all of the strings come in. And also, as you were mentioning before, recitative is kind of a more loose, it's sung dialogue, and that mainly is how the plot advances, and then we get to arias or duets. Never more than a duet because there are only two of you singing, but that kind of takes off from the place where we left in the recitative, where it's expressing the emotion that's being felt at that time.
Now,
oh, sorry, Maestro.
Maestro, that's up to you. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add to that of course the style of this music, which is different from what you see in La Boheme, is what we call closed musical numbers. So there is a clear distinction between sections. Now, on the other hand, this music will not end with a big high note and a huge chord from the orchestra and somebody screaming "me" at the top of their lungs, but so it is, in a way, from a musical standpoint, something we're less used with our modern ears, but the clear distinctions between sections, I think, is evident in the score.
And a question, unfortunately, there's a 4-letter word here, which I probably should not repeat, but are the musicians mic'd? I know that's a 5-letter word, but mic. So I will answer that. No, musicians are not mic'd. There actually is no need to mic. First of all, opera singers and orchestra people, what makes their performance special is that what you're hearing is the sound that comes out of their instruments, whether it's singing or not. And also, we're fortunate to be in a theater rather than in a 2,000 seat arena of some kind, that everything, you'll be able to hear everyone, and with no mics in the pit, or anyplace else.
But this year, something a little different is that they will be wearing masks. And that's something we really haven't talked about, is just the incredible safety protocols that you and Richard Russell developed to keep us all safe. It's really, I think, for all of us, made us feel safe to come back, knowing that so much attention and what has been put into testing and safety.
We've been together for, 3 weeks now, but this is the only moment that we see each other's faces, just for our audience to know. We always see each other with masks.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. So Stefano and Anna will not be wearing masks. We've been in kind of a bubble. So it is safe for them to be performing together. But when they come off stage, they're immediately putting on masks because they're nearby other people backstage. But yes, you will be singing without masks. But we've been rehearsing. You've had to rehearse in staging rehearsals with the masks, which was a real challenge too. And for me as a director, it was hard to sometimes see expressions on your face. I just had to go by your eyes.
And that's, it's been, I'm sorry to just add that it has been for us, for our singers, at least for me, the first time that we had to rehearse and sing with masks, which is something that is really not pleasurable, not easy, but I think that it was an absolute must that we did, and we learned how to. At the beginning, it was a little bit like I felt desperate to breathe and sing into a mask, but luckily we did it, and it was the reason why we can perform now.
I have a question. Can your orchestra pit accommodate a large orchestra that is required for a Strauss or Wagner opera? Yes, it can. Not every Strauss opera or not every Wagner opera, but certainly, let's say Tristan and Isolde and Lohengrin, but not the Ring Cycle. So both those composers wrote for smaller orchestras and very big orchestras. Are there programs available this year? Yes, there are. We do have a printed program. Richard, you're hiding there. Is he gonna come out? Richard.
I'm
you are.
here.
Is our program available on our website? Printed program?
It will be available on our website, and it will be available to people who are going to be able to view, because we haven't talked about this, or you haven't talked about this, that this performance will also be available streamed. We are recording it next weekend or this weekend, and it'll be available beginning March 1st for a month for people to stream it. So we have an electronic version of the program and a hard copy version of the program as well.
Thank you. I have two things. I'm going to close with the second one, but now that you have a few performances with the smaller, oh, it went away. Where'd you go? Okay. Orchestra, what have you learned that you can apply to this opera, meaning from L'Inganno Felice, from The Happy Deception? It is a little different because here we have only strings. So certainly we've learned something about how the orchestra could be placed in the pit. We've made, since our first performance, we have made some changes in how the orchestra sits, and it's made quite a big difference. Kind of very often something that you would look into the pit and possibly not know can make a very big difference to the orchestra. One of the things about distancing, there are a couple of things about distancing that one has to deal with. First of all, musicians are used to having people close to them. So you make music with someone who is a foot away from you, and it's easier to hear them. Also, if you're a string player, you have two people playing the same part. So as one stops the music, as the page turns for the music, you have somebody turning the page while somebody continues to play. Every musician is sitting with his own part and with his own music. The other thing is there are fewer bodies in the pit to absorb the sound. I found that a little surprising at our first rehearsal, because instead of having our normal 50, 60, or 70 people in the pit, as we've had, there's a lot of air there and a lot of time that can, a lot of ability for a sound to echo and re-echo. So that's something we've all had to get used to. Now, I am going to throw the last question over to you, Stefano, because this says, have you kept your voice in shape over the year? Why am I asking you that?
I don't know. Well, I think that we all had to stay home and try to keep our voices flexible and active. So I chose to sing a lot at home. And also I found this this website where you can actually, with a sort of karaoke, where there are all the soundtrack of arias and from opera and also from other kind of music, of course, but you can actually adjust the key to your own voice. So basically I was able to sing lots of operas and arias that I would never dream of singing, like sopranos arias, tenors arias, mezzos arias, and baritons, high baritons arias. So that's what I did. I sang a lot at home.
Yes, your Lady Macbeth is the talk of the town, I tell you. So I want to thank you all, and thanks so many of you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you either at the Opera House, or you will, well, we don't really see anyone at the Opera House. We are not allowed in the, none of us who perform are allowed in the theater, according to our protocol director, who is Richard Russell. And, but we look forward to you seeing us, and we hope if you're not coming to the theater that you will stream and enjoy our performance. And I thank our 4 panelists very much. And I look, as we say in Bocca Lupo, or break a leg for Friday night to everyone. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.